Tynwald returns from its summer recess next week, so what does the order paper tell us about what the government has been up to since July? There's no update from the Health Minister on Manx Care's overspend, but perhaps the Chief Minister will reveal more in his autumn statement. MHKs Claire Christian and Rob Callister join me now in the studio to pick over the relatively small number of motions. Have you got any idea what the Chief Minister might be saying?
So obviously we don't have any advice on what's going to be in there, but I would expect to hear from the Chief Minister, certainly on the steam packet. I would expect to hear about the efficiencies across government that are being implemented and what the action plan is regarding that. I don't know about you, obviously, Rob, if you agree. I think also I'd expect to hear also to do with what the healthcare situation, an update on that, and also housing, possibly if we're going to hear about this initiative of a housing association.
Rob, obviously the Chief Minister talked about reprioritising government, and there were various measures that were announced. I think it was in July, Tynwald, that they were going to be busy over the summer. They were going to have conversations with the steam packet. The Chief Executive Officer was being asked to find efficiencies throughout government. Are you expecting to hear any of this in the Chief Minister's statement?
Well, I think if I was the Chief Minister for the Isle of Man, I'd be probably rewriting my autumn statement over the weekend, because obviously a week in politics is it can change any time of day. And I think over the last few days, I think what has become very central is the issues involving Manx Care, and obviously the role that the health service is playing in this. Obviously, I want to hear that in the autumn statement by the Chief Minister. I want to hear very clearly how our Chief Minister is going to address some of those issues around fundings. How are we going to protect frontline services from being cut? This is what I want to hear in the statement. Obviously, when I looked back at last year's autumn statement, it was quite just generalised. It was introducing new officers that were coming into government to make these real tough decisions and to change culture, not just within the civil servants, but actually across government and within the politics arena as well. And I'm not sure things have changed that much over the last year. I think, if anything, things have got slightly worse than we were 12 months ago. So I want to see a very bold autumn statement from the Chief Minister outlining exactly how and what is causing the issues with Manx Care at the moment.
Claire Christian, I don't know, were you surprised at the Chief Minister making his pre-conference announcement about the unacceptability of the health overspend? It did seem then to kind of overshadow the whole of the Isle of Man Government Conference, that the Chief Minister had made these pronouncements about what he felt was unacceptable.
Yeah, I think what I'm more surprised about, I wasn't surprised that he made a statement about it, but what I'm more surprised about now is the terminology that he used then, that it was like an immediate action needed to be taken. And, he was saying that to a room full of 250 people, and now there doesn't seem to be that same urgent action. I haven't heard anything more about it. Maybe he's waiting to do that in Tynwald on Tuesday.
But I suppose the urgent action appears to be being taken by Manx Care, and that they are cutting frontline services.
Absolutely, and I think the announcement today, and please forgive me because I have just literally raced from an evidence session with EPRC, but so I've not seen the full detail on the Manx Care statement of the cutting of the services, but from what I understand, it's almost for me, Manx Care are saying, if this is what's going to happen if we don't get the extra funding, and if you don't find that, it's almost holding a gun to the head of government, really.
Rob, you were Health Minister. Are you kind of glad now that you vacated that role?
No, I wish I was still the health minister, because I think I could have worked with Manx Care to sit down and look at the financial position. I know when I was the health minister, very briefly, I had a conversation with the Treasury Minister about budget. And even in that financial year, I knew, according to the Sir Jonathan Michael's report, the financial funding that I was receiving was going to be slightly less than what I was expected, taking into account the calculation. I think what needs to happen here is we need to rebuild the confidence. We need to understand exactly what's happening with Manx Care, because let's be perfectly honest, when they start each financial year, they know quite a lot of their base costs. They'll know what the employee costs are. They'll know what the heating costs are, etc. So they should have a very firm understanding of what the basic cost is to run Manx Care. Then obviously there will be a variance because they don't know how many customers or patients they're going to get year on year. But at the end of the day, they should be able to understand it. Now, this financial year, both the minister and the chief executive both have said we'll try and stay within budget. But within a matter of weeks of the amount being assigned in this financial year, we all got to know that the Manx Care was going to be financially over what's been allocated. Now, I know since then the Treasury has issued their management accounts for 2024 or June 2024, and it shows that 4 departments potentially are going to go over budget. Now, that does raise a question. Are the Treasury allowing the departments to set the income streams correctly, or are we setting them so unrealistic that departments are always going to be overspending because they cannot reach those income targets? And that is a question that I'll certainly be asking in Tynwald on Tuesday.
Claire Christian, isn't it the case that for probably ever since we lost that 200 million of VAT, of the VAT share, that departments could reasonably say they have been underfunded, but they've had to try and make do with the funds that are available. The truth of the matter is you can't spend money that you don't have.
No, and I agree. I think for me, where this comes down to the budget from the start of that point. So I would hope that this is kind of going into a little bit of the next item on the agenda, the Treasury Minister's statement, but I would hope to see a lot of budget reforms and change in how the budget works and how that comes to members. And really the problem essentially is that you have departments constantly working in silos. It goes to that age-old problem. And although we are told by Treasury that there is this use it or lose it system does not exist, it doesn't allow mechanisms currently for departments to not use it or lose it. So nothing can be rolled over into the next year currently, and you have different jurisdictions across the world, which for example, I think it's New Zealand, which do a rollover, and then every 3 years basically you decide whether that goes back into the central pot or whether that goes to a different to be spent elsewhere, and those type of budget reforms I think would really help the departments who perhaps are coming on within budgets not feel they have to spend because they could move it into the next year, and then once you get after 3 years it could be then used in elsewhere within government. When I think about the departments that I've worked in within those departments you have divisions, and clearly at a real base level, if those divisions have a budget with to use, they're not going to want to not spend that last 30,000 because they'll lose that, and it might be something that's integral to them for the following year. And if you think about of all the divisions that we have within government, how that changes and how it basically makes us spend what we have, and I think that's really fundamentally one of the problems that we have with our system right now. So I would really strongly advocate for Treasury to be making a statement on changes within the budget and how it's going to be coming. And then obviously it's different for capital expenditure as well. So we don't, as members, we can't sit there and look at an overall picture and say we want to spend money on a new school, or we want to spend money on swimming pools, or we want to spend money on a new wing, or whatever it is of a hospital. We don't get that capital expenditure kind of overall strategy. In fact, it's changed dramatically the other way, whereby every quarter you put your business case in for capital expenditure, and it's basically you're again working in a little silo. This then comes to Tynwald for approval. I mean, I can think of one, and I think to the public, I'll come back to the one I'll give you as an example. To the public, when these items come up individually, there doesn't seem to be this strategy. So when we're talking about horse trams for 1 minute, or we're talking about a new the example I was going to give, the new sound system in the Villa Gaiety, when we're voting on those individually, we're not comparing what actually is really important for the Isle of Man, because we're constantly doing it piecemeal. So that would be something I would really like to see us change to a model where we can strategically look at where we're going to spend the money in a forward plan of 5 to 10 years.
Interestingly, the 3-year budget that you mentioned there, it was introduced, I think it was 2008, before the loss of the 200 million, and it lasted about 6 months before we went back to just annual budgeting. Anyway, so we've had the Treasury, we've moved down then to the Treasury Minister's statement, which is item 5 on the order paper, but effectively the second main item once questions are out of the way. That Treasury statement will, though, Rob Callister, come before Rachel Reeve gives her statement or her budget to the UK Parliament, so there'll be no opportunity to react to that.
I agree, but I think we need to focus here on the Isle of Man. Obviously, what's said in the UK, the Treasury team will actually pick that up, post-event, and then obviously assess it and evaluate it, and then if need be, make any adjustments and statements later on. Again, very similar to the Chief Minister's statement, I think the actual Treasury Minister needs to give honourable members in Tynwald a very clear understanding exactly what is the financial position. We know from the financial statements from government we get in over £1.2 billion, but we also spend £1.2 billion. I'm not, I want to applaud the government because their income is increasing year on year. Where we seem to have the major issue at the moment is the spending. Where are we spending it? Are we getting value for money? Are we getting the right projects through? Are we actually addressing the concerns that we need to address?
Is the problem, though, that it's not, the income is not increasing enough to keep up with the increasing spending demands?
Well, no, if you only go back a handful of years, we were getting just over £850 million, and we were spending pretty much less than that. Our expenditure has increased dramatically in recent years. So we need to understand why that is the case. We need to really analyse every cost we're spending. Are we spending it in the right direction? Are we getting value for money? That's what we need to focus in. And again, I think from a Treasury point of view, I want the Minister to explain exactly, has he had an input into Manx Care's, these decisions Manx Care is making? Has he signed them off? Has the Health Minister signed them off? Or has the Chief Minister signed them off? Because I cannot believe that Manx Care would make such dramatic decisions that would affect so many island lives without having it signed off either by the Council of Ministers, Chief Minister, Treasury Minister, or the Health Minister, all of them collectively. But we know from Manx Radio interviews, 2 of those of the 3 have actually stood up and said, it wasn't me, and it wasn't me. So we will see on Tuesday.
I mean, Manx Care, effectively the whole point of setting up Manx Care was it would operate independently of government. So it has its rules set, its overall objectives set by the Department of Health and Social Care, and its budget set by Tynwald. Well, so presumably it's then when the Chief Minister says, look, you were told what your budget was and we expect you to meet your budget, Manx Care will have accepted that's that's what they have to do.
Well, let's look at that. We split it, obviously, that they would have the operational side of Manx Care and obviously of the health service of the Isle of Man, and then what would actually happen is the department would look at the strategic direction. Now, if Manx Care was saying we're going to cut this service, I as the health minister would have actually said, well, okay, let's have a conversation, because I think maybe we should be targeting this one, and I would be supporting them, getting behind them. But if they are making decisions on an operation level that affects so many people, then is that relationship working? And do we need to have a look at, one, the finances correctly? I think it's a Tynwald situation. It's not just an individual council of ministers or individual members. I think Tynwald needs to grasp this and needs to seriously have a briefing exactly to understand every single part of Manx Care, exactly where the money's being spent. Are we getting value for money? Are they cutting the right parts in the short term? Because there's no point cutting, for example, like I've said before, there's no point cutting elective surgery after Tynwald had endorsed £20 million spend to cut it from 4,500 operations that were waiting down to 2,500, suddenly only for the next couple of months for that figure to increase again. That does not make sense. It really doesn't.
It doesn't, does it? And Claire Christian, isn't this, or shouldn't this have been something that was considered when Manx Care was introduced, that there is an inevitability that politics is going to interfere with the delivery of healthcare, because quite frankly, you as an elected member, in fact all the elected members, have a keen interest in representing your constituents, and your constituents are the patients that are treated by Manx Care. So whilst it was a great idea to try and separate clinical decisions from politics, ultimately, when it comes to a situation like this where there's not enough money for Manx Care to deliver for the patients, politics gets involved.
Yeah, and I can't remember the exact words I said 4 years ago, but I do remember the Manx Care mandate when it was being approved through Tynwald. I do remember saying something along the lines of, this mandate is setting Manx Care up for a fall, because the mandate was just so vast and so wide, and that this comes back to funding problems, and the just to read my motion, which I brought in July 2024, so just before we close the summer recess. My motion was that Tynwald calls upon government to submit for debate at the October sitting of Tynwald plans for funding the island plan and economic strategy, and plans for funding other commitments that have been made in this administration and are not in the island plan, and then plans for filling any fiscal gaps. So clearly that would have, had that gone through, that would have shown things like the problems that we are having within Manx Care and in other areas. Now, as Rob mentioned to us before we started, the financial update from the Treasury Minister, is supposed to address that. But just to highlight that when these statements happen, we can't debate, we just get to ask questions. And that's a very different scenario where we can stand up and just say X, Y and Z. We don't get to debate it and actually shape the policies that the Treasury Minister...
But you could have put... private members' motions down, and indeed I note that you and your the Policy Alliance have several motions down. None of the other members have for this month's Tynwald put any motions down, and you might have thought, with health spending being such a big issue, someone might have thought to put something down on that. So
I think that one of the reasons that we put those motions down, the four general debates, which one of them I've taken off because government put on the incentives and disincentives of immigration anyway, so no point in having it twice on there, was because the government conference was being used as a vehicle to make announcements, and we were taking away the opportunity for this to be discussed in an open public forum within Tynwald or within the House of Keys. So Interestingly enough, the conference was actually on the Tuesday. The deadline for putting down any private members' motions is obviously the Monday before. So we had to anticipate that they weren't going to put anything like that down, and we were 3 out of 4 right that they weren't going to give us the opportunity to discuss these issues, which are really, really important issues. So I'm really pleased these general debates have been put down by my colleagues, and I look forward to hopefully really good insight from all of the MHKs, because the thing about general debates are that we expect the council of ministers also to take part. This isn't just a backbencher general debate. This is a chance for members to stand up and to actually make their points in these areas. And I really hope that we get some great debates that happen, because I haven't seen that this administration. Having
then moved past the Chief Minister and the Treasury Minister's statements, we get to the Council of Ministers report on inward migration incentives and disincentives. So sorry,
Phil, just to come back to the Treasury statement, I want to see, in the similar ilk that my colleague Rob just said, if I was Chief Minister, well, if I was Treasury Minister, I would be reassuring the economy, reassuring businesses, this is what we're doing in terms of tax, this is what we're doing in terms of our work permits, in terms of our minimum wage. I would be absolutely laying down the firm grounds to making sure that we've got a sustainable economy, and that give confidence. Not saying it's gone completely, but I'm saying that a lot of the problems that we're certainly sending out in terms of our message that we can't afford to pay for that certain infrastructure and healthcare, etc., it's sending out a really bad message about the Isle of Man. So I would expect a lot of firm statements from the Treasury Minister, and also that it's really, really important about that tax, because they put that 2% up at the beginning of this, in February. If you were within, those departments, that obviously the one department, the healthcare department, that 2% was going to, I want to know what action is being taken, has been taken for that 2% to not be added again come this February, because isn't that what we all want? That was meant to be a temporary fix, and I need to know from the Treasury Minister what steps have been taken so that 2% does not appear in his next budget.
Back to what we were talking about. I was trying to talk about anyway, inward migration incentives and disincentives. That is kind of related to what you were saying there, Claire, Christian, in that perhaps one of the big unanswered questions, which has been a big unanswered question ever since I think it was 2000, when we introduced legislation to allow for control of population, but then that's never been actually brought into force. So the legislation is sitting there waiting to be used at some future point. And what I suppose we've done is we've used work permits as the means for controlling population for much of the last 3-4 decades. Is it time now that we actually brought into force the legislation which effectively introduces, I think it's a kind of a points-based system, isn't it, for who can come to live and work on the Isle of Man and who can't? Rob, I don't know, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we had this report that was published in July. My colleague Claire obviously put down an amendment in order to look at an NHS surcharge, which then got sort of steamrolled a little bit, and we're now forward to this time, and we've obviously come back with this report which talks about inward migration initiatives and incentives. Now, again, one of the things you said earlier is about general debates and everything else. Obviously, over the summer recess, we've had the situation with an immigration, an ongoing case, which we've got to be really careful about. But then obviously we have situations with buses and other services as well. So sometimes a lot of things do happen within a week. But to actually talk about this report, I mean, obviously I've gone through everything, and I personally think that we need to, as the report highlights, I think we do need to have this single registration system for all residents. But within that, adapt more robust checks on who is actually coming to work in the Isle of Man, not just criminal convictions, but also employment references. I really genuinely think that government and employers have a duty here to get that right, because obviously one of the selling points of the Isle of Man is it's a beautiful island. It is safe to bring up children, safe place to live, and we should never ever forget that. And I think there's also, when I did this presentation, there was obviously there's some slight changes here, because originally they talked about saying, well, there's now going to be more information fed back to the Council of Ministers. Well, that was never the original recommendation from the Tynwald Committee. The original committee report actually said there should be a migration committee set up with a political chair. So we're not achieving what was originally agreed some years ago. Now,
but I suppose if you were in the Council of Ministers, the last thing you would want is a committee of Tynwald interfering with government policy.
Agreed, but I think we've got to look at the inward migration. Obviously, we want to make the Isle of Man an attractive place for people to come, to live, to work and everything else. Now, one of the levers on this is the fact is they keep talking about, well, you know, we've only got 0.6% unemployed and we've got nearly 1,000 jobs. But when you actually break down, you know, the August report, and I have it in front of me, there was 871 jobs being advertised, which is fantastic. But when you break it down, 268 of those are highly skilled medical and health services. Okay, so that's one point. And then the other, so they're very well paid jobs. The other side of it, we've got 320 retail and catering jobs, which, let's be honest, are lower salary jobs, minimum work, minimum hours sort of salary at the best of it. So it's still very difficult for an ordinary person on the Isle of Man to find a full-time job when you find yourself out of work. And there's one of the things I picked up at the presentation from Tynwald members, there's very little in here about reskilling, retraining. And we heard in last week's programme about potential thousands of jobs being lost due to AI over the next 10 years or something. And we need to focus more on retraining and re-supporting people to have multiple careers through their lifetime.
The Minister for Education, was announcing some increased funding. I think it was an extra, 200,000, something like that, for the Skills Board. So that was only fairly recent.
It was, but when you actually break it, I've got it here, the Skills Strategy 2024 to 27, you know, it has put funds in there, which is absolutely great. And this is something I've talked about. You know, we do need to really focus in on lifelong learning.
You can't have it both ways, though, because you were just saying there hasn't been enough done, and then
no, there hasn't been enough action. They've talked about they've actually published a strategy, and when you go through, there's not enough action in there. It does talk about lifelong learning, supporting people through supported education and whatever. But when you actually go online, there's very few courses that people can access to retrain, to reskill. So this is a government initiative with employers. We need to do a lot more to make sure that people over 50, people under 24 are able to be given the same opportunities as everybody else, especially when they're in their 50s, because they seem to be a forgotten category. And I've said that for the last 7 years. If you reach 50, they still have a lot to offer, and not everyone and not everybody is ready to retire. So government needs to help them reskill, retrain.
Just in support of what Rob is talking about there, in the Economic Policy Review evidence session with the Chamber of Commerce, they actually raised the point of AI, and they said that the way that we can address that, the reduction in jobs, is by investing and upskilling our Manx residents, and that was actually the way to deal with it. So I think I absolutely agree that is going to be incredibly important, more important, and we're going to need to react far quicker than we are doing so in terms of what Rob is saying. I think one of the things, to your point, Phil, is this inward migration and incentives and disincentives. When we get presented something like this, what I saw in this presentation was more spending. And I know this a centralised list, and I know and sort of better immigrate, all of these areas. What concerns me is more, we're coming up with more policy that is unfunded, that's not on the island plan, and this comes back to why we're constantly over budget, and puts more pressure on departments, because we as politicians see, oh, that's a great idea, we should absolutely do that, yeah, we should make sure that happens. And actually, the only piece in the inward migration incentives and disincentives that actually made money was the healthcare surcharge, which was what I tried to get through in December 2023. That was the only incentive, or disincentive as it's being called by in this report, but that was actually going to make money and actually bring in revenue specifically for the healthcare, which, as you can see, is, well, we all know is under great pressure.
You say that it's mentioned as a disincentive. Presumably that means the government doesn't want to do it. There are lots of people on the Isle of Man, there are even a few commenting on social media, who say, actually, you know what, I've never paid anything into the Manx system. I'm living here now, and actually I should be paying some kind of health levy. So just if I can take the opportunity to just explain very clearly that the healthcare surcharge, which I'm proposing, is that it is for people, immigrants that are coming in with from outside the Common Travel Area, so it's outside the UK, outside Northern Ireland, and so from wherever, Australia, South Africa, and they would pay the same healthcare surcharge as if they were going to the UK. And obviously, we have a reciprocal agreement with them. So currently, when you think about it right now, if they come in to us through the back door, as so to speak, once they've got residency after 5 years, they can then go to the UK and have free movement. And actually, they're coming here. It's a very cheap way of coming into the Isle of Man. And not investing in our healthcare. And in a really, really basic level, I want to go into my hospital, into Noble's Hospital, or go to my GP, and I want to know that I am sitting with people that have contributed in the same way that I have. And I think Manx taxpayers have burdened enough of this, the 2% increase. They've had enough on their shoulders for that, and that's hit the low to middle income earners more than anybody. And actually, if you've got 19 I mean, there's one FOI case which I keep bringing up. But there's 19 visa applications in one case that was given, and actually only 5 of them were working. So there were 14 dependents that were coming to the Isle of Man. Now, it's okay. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But what I would like to know is that they're contributing to our healthcare at the very, very, very minimum, and it is comparable to the situation that it is in the UK. And let's bear in mind, in Jersey and Guernsey right now, what I understand, in Guernsey, primary healthcare you have to pay for, secondary healthcare you don't, and in Jersey you have to pay for both primary and secondary, but it's means tested. So we're not on a level playing field at all. You can come here right now from outside the Common Travel Area and you can access free healthcare. And I suppose it isn't actually okay, is it, to bring in 19 people, 5 of which are economically active and the other 14 aren't, because the main reason we have the economic strategy and much of what government's hanging its hat on, bringing in more economically active people, is to try and address or redress the balance in relation to that ratio of employed and economically active people compared with those who aren't. Rob, you were trying to come in there.
Well, I'm just going to come in this. The UK have actually introduced the healthcare fee since 2015, and that's generated just under £2 billion. Now, I slightly disagree with Claire, because obviously we have a reciprocal health agreement. So what we should be doing is maybe speaking to the UK and saying, are we not entitled to a part of that if people are coming from the UK, from England, should we say, and onto the Isle of Man, living and then accessing our health service? So there is an easier option.
But equally,
I mean, the fee...
they might turn around to us and say, well, you've got so many immigrants that aren't paying and you're using our services. And, in the UK, if they go over there, they can say they're a Manx resident and could you help me out in A&E? So actually, they might turn that around.
Well, this is why we need the discussion. The fee isn't massive. It's just over £1,000 for most visa immigration applications.
It's about £86 a month.
Yeah, and it's about £776 for students or under 18s. So it's not a huge amount. But as I say, the UK already collect or have collected £2 billion since 2015. So I'm sure the conversations could be held where we have this common travel area, where we have this reciprocal health arrangement, where maybe we should be able just to access some of those funding, especially if people are travelling, are being accepted in the UK, and then can travel to the Isle of Man freely and set up home here, set up businesses, and then access our health service free of charge.
We will move on because we're coming. We're not coming to the end of the programme yet, but we are getting further into the programme than out of it. 3 items that follow that particular item on inward migration incentives, disincentives are the Treasury Department plan, the Department of Home Affairs Department plan, and the Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture's Department plan. What's the point of these debates?
So, the department plans were brought as an idea by the current chief minister to hold the departments to account. And what I think of the problem is we've never really defined what holding them to account means, or how is that actioned, because a department plan is produced, we stand up and debate it and say we're not happy with X, we're not happy with Y. We can bring amendments if we want to. In fact, I did bring an amendment to the island plan in very early stages. But the problem is that accountability. So for me, you really see it. So dates are changing, and a department plan is produced every year, but every quarter they're updated, and you have to be really lucky if you catch, the topic that you're interested in, or the political hot potato that you're interested in, and seeing that that's now been delayed by 12 months, or now been delayed or taken off, completely removed, and there's no track changes, there's no way, and it's really there. I think the way that it's set up, sadly, is to confuse you as much as possible, and you've got to have your wits about you in terms of what's going on with these department plans. What I will say is that one of the department plans that is coming through is DEFA, and I did feed that back in with being in the department, and wanted to make sure that anything had changed or had removed. There was clear narrative about that, because I wanted to be open and transparent in the department that I'm in. So I hope that that's the same. But I mean, I can give you an example in the Department of Home Affairs plan. I'll have to come back to it. But basically, one of the dates changed about... maybe we'll let Rob answer while I find it.
Yeah, I mean, for the public, these are a shop window to see what's going on. But a lot of the time, the department will only really publish, the positives and everything else when I've read them. I think personally, maybe they should only be laid before Tynwald, and if a member had a concern about a particular report or a particular section report, then what could happen is they could pick it up and bring it back to Tynwald. Because when I read through the 3 reports that are coming, yeah, it's great to read what's in there. Most of the targets are online and everything else. So to me, I don't really need to debate them, because I've read it, I understand what the departments are doing, it's great to see, but I don't need to debate them.
So I think I found it's the illicit drugs review, the review into illicit drugs, and that's really, actually, it's really, really important, because we're looking at immigration at the moment, and we're looking at more immigration rules about passport control, and us being able to stop the drug problem here on the Isle of Man. And that it's essential and been long overdue to try and assist the police with that, so that we can see who's coming to the island, and are they necessarily the person who's booked the ticket on the steam packet. So, for example, that's really, really important. But what's going to happen, Phil, is if that's effective and is works, we're going to basically cut the supply of drugs to certain Manx public. And you need a healthcare plan for those people. And I understand there's perhaps some 250 people that do have drug addiction problems, and having that healthcare support, in terms of making sure that they are going to be okay. And this piece of work, the review into illicit drugs and harms, is now delayed quite considerably. It means that we've not got that piece of work there that will help support those people. So it's kind of the chicken and the egg. So these kind of things, you really, really have to make sure, how do we hold those departments to account? How do we make sure that that when the tail is wagging and the dog's barking, that it's happening at the right time? But it's not. And so what mechanisms do we have to actually change these? We can bring back a motion and say, no, actually, this department plan went through, but we want it changed. And we could see if that works.
And I suppose that's part of the problem, really, with these plans. I mean, I still remember John Remington describing his agriculture, fisheries and forestry plan as meaningless drivel. I have to say that maybe, what are we now, 20 years on from John Remington saying that, I'm not convinced that the plans have developed that much further. And as you say, if you can't then ultimately hold people to account for what was in the plan in the first place, you wonder what the point of them is.
I mean, usually what we hear is we don't have the resources, this is going to cost money, etc., etc. This is why this has changed in the plan. Well, if we'd funded them in the beginning, in the first place, had an island plan that was funded, then actually maybe these sort of things wouldn't have actually happened. And it's just this circle. It keeps coming back to the amendment that I tried to make in the island plan to actually it be funded, and for Treasury to show how we were going to pay for these things. And yeah, we're almost, it's back to the mandate. We're setting them up for fools.
But if you actually go a little bit further than that, though, we move this on to the next item on the order paper, which is the police report, annual report. For me, that is a report that the public do need to see, and it does give us, again, a shop window. So I think when we're focusing in on something, I think the Chief Constable's annual report for 23-24 does make excellent reading, because it does give us a shop window of what's actually physically happening in the Isle of Man. So if you actually look at that one, what concerned me when I looked at that report, organised crime gangs, 208, youth offending, 520, repeat victim assaults and stuff, 156. It was really concerning when you read that. And one of the things that did stand out for me as a political member is the fact there was complaints against the police this year was 63. So these are all the questions, and this is what the public need to see, is the Isle of Man a safe place to live? And I think overall it is still a safe place to live.
Does anyone in government or in Tynwald do the common sense check? Because I guess that most people know whether or not the Isle of Man is a safe place to live. They know from their personal experiences. Now that not everyone is impacted by crime, and some people's experiences will be different to others, but the amount of officer time spent generating all this information for you in Tynwald to occasionly pick up particular points and use
but I think
for debate. There's a huge amount of officer time goes into that. What we know is that there are fewer and fewer senior officers available to do the work, such as you were describing there, Claire Christian, in relation to illicit substances. Instead of getting on with the day job, which is producing the report that you need in relation to illicit substances, they've been producing a department plan which may or may not be
I would probably step back from the department plans, but I think the Chief Constable's report is a valuable report that's needed. I think we need it as a community here on the Isle of Man. We need to know, because as you say, very few people are actually in touch with a crime every year. but they still would like to know what's happening around the island. And it's a fascinating report. Obviously, that report also highlights serious concerns around recruitment of officers and the retention of officers. And we as politicians should be fully aware of that. So these reports are valuable not just to us as political members, but also to the public, I think, and different demographics in our community. So that one, I think we should never get rid of. But I think the sort of department plans, the annual department plans, I probably would step back from those a little bit.
There was one question from the floor at the government conference which the Chief Minister acknowledged was a really good question, but he didn't feel it was his place at that conference to answer. And that was, in effect, it was about the accountability of government. Effectively, we elect as the public every 5 years new members of the government. The government itself never stands for election. The individual members do, but so how do you actually hold Isle of Man government to account? Is the system fit for purpose, I suppose, is the real question here. And sadly, we've only got just under 5 minutes to answer that.
So I think, I remember that question. I think it was also on about how people were elected as well, how MHKs were elected, and the Chief Minister didn't want to talk about that at the conference. Holding government to account surely is our job as the elected representatives. But
I suppose the premise is if government does a really, really bad job, completely fails to deliver on all the targets it sets for itself and squanders vast amounts of taxpayers' funds, who carries the can for that ultimately? We have a structure where you have the CEO, and the COs are responsible to the CEO. And so it's like any other organisation, I would say, that they would have targets and KPIs to achieve. But I suppose in most political
we don't
contexts,
see that. Just to say to you, I don't, certainly as a backbencher or in the department, see a performance management of a CEO or members of the civil service. So we don't see that in that sense.
But I suppose it's the democratic element to this, isn't it? In most other parliamentary and government systems, ultimately, come election time, you are voting on the performance of the government over the previous term.
And this is where it's going to get confusing, you see, Phil, when we start talking about arm's length organisation. We started this programme talking about Manx Care. Now, we as political members will be held accountable for the decisions being made by Manx Care. Regardless if we're involved in that day to day, we'll be held to account when people can't get a dentist, they can't get a doctor's appointment. And this is why I'm saying government has to be really careful about setting up these arm's length organisation. There has to be somebody politically responsible and accountable. Even for the tough decisions that Manx Care is making, somebody has to be politically responsible. And we all have a role to play in that. But to do that, we have to be able to have an input to that decision in order to go out and say, yes, we did have an input into that decision. This is our stance on it, and this is what we were trying on your behalf.
The civil service, and I'm really probably stepping on the unsaid conversations that are had probably, but genuinely, the civil service don't want politicians to be operationally minded in any way, shape or form. They want to keep us separate. I don't come from a background like that. I'm sorry, I never will. As far as I'm concerned, I need to understand the operations to be able to set the right policy. I need to understand the budget to know that we can afford that policy that I'm making or creating as a politician. Sorry, I think I do agree being involved in the day-to-day, etc., but I have to have an understanding operationally. If I don't, and I keep it all at arm's length, and I say no, the civil service, you're responsible for that. I think that's where the problems are happening. If you don't have an understanding, and you, in any organisation, whether it be government or whether that be private, at the CEO level, at the senior vice president's level, at those kind of levels, which we are, I guess, we're sort of operating, you must have an understanding of what the day-to-day running and how and what pressures they're under, because every time we bring through a policy through Tynwald, it affects them, affects their day-to-day jobs, it changes the priority for them, and possibly affects general day-to-day running, and that is important for us to have that understanding.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think the key thing there is you need the understanding. Just because you have an understanding of the operational business side of it does not mean that you're getting involved in the operational. Exactly. It's just an understanding so you can set the right policy based on the information and the data you have.
We have 2 years left of this government. Are you convinced that we're going to start seeing the delivery that many feel perhaps hasn't been to the forefront in the first 3 years?
I think we've got to start delivering, and I think we've got to start to listen. I think we've got an island plan. There's a lot of positives within that. We've got to start delivering on some of those promises that we've made in the island plan. And I'm hoping that the Chief Minister also will start to listen to what's happening outside and within government.
Claire?
I would say that we need a refocused island plan. We need to streamline that itself and be realistic what we can achieve in the next 2 years, and be very, very, very clear to the public. This is what we are going to achieve in the next 2 years, and the rest of it we're going to achieve in the next administration. I think that is what the public want to hear. They don't want to hear any more politicians telling them a line. We're going to do this, we're going to do this, we've got this strategy. They just need clear communication. We're going to do X, Y and Z within every department and within the overall government.
MHKs Claire, Christian and Rob Callister there. So what do you think? Does the lack of statement on Manx Care's overspend surprise you? Perhaps you think it's better for government to take its time and get things right, rather than rushing out ill-conceived headline-grabbing statements. I expect lively debate when Tynwald returns next Tuesday. Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gorn at manxradio.com, and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. I'm Phil Gorn, Gora Maius and Geistachrum. Thanks for listening.